When I was raising my kids, and they were quite a bit younger, we used to travel back and forth from Atlanta to Seattle often, many times a year. And I have family in Georgia, so we were there visiting grandma and aunts and uncles. And they were about this age. They're quite a bit bigger now. And when we hit the Rocky Mountains, our plane just dropped. Have you ever had that happen? You know, and your stomach kind of goes, woo, and you feel the seatbelt tighten against you? Everyone in the plane kind of went, or they screamed or yelled because it was shocking. And then the storm hit. And there was lightning. We must have been on a red eye. It was nighttime. And so the lightning was coming through the windows, the ones that were still open, and the wind, I remember it would come sideways, and we would just, you could see us just kind of going this way, and then the turbulence was awful. And I remember looking down that tunnel of the fuselage, seeing all the people kind of bouncing to the syncopated, turbulence of it. We were all moving in the same motion, and I was terrified. I've flown a lot, and it takes a lot of turbulence to get me worried, and I was worried. I was nervous. I was very scared, as well as everybody else on the flight, except for one person. My daughter, you see her there, Lorna, she was having the time of her life. She thought this was the best roller coaster ride ever, and so every jerk and woo took you by surprise. She would just be hooting and hollering and squealing with glee, and the rest of us are like, oh, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and she's just like, woohoo, and finally I'm like, knock it off, you're freaking everybody out, and and she was just loving that storm. She was riding it like it was a crazy fun time, and she completely trusted we were going to be fine. And so she enjoyed the storm. Today we're going to be talking about storms. And like Pastor Charlie said a few minutes ago, we're in this talk series, Why Blank Jesus? Why follow, trust, believe Jesus? Jesus said if we don't believe his teaching, what he said about himself and what he taught, at least believe his works, believe his miracles. So we're looking at a miracle from the Bible that Jesus did each Sunday. And we're also looking at a story of somebody today, because Jesus is still working miracles. He's still moving in people's lives. And so we're going to hear a great story today from Captain Jake Fouts, our Snoqualmie fire training captain, and he's going to share in a few minutes the story of following Jesus through a really big storm in his life. And of course, when storms in life hit us, and they can be physical storms like I went through on that airplane, they can probably be more metaphorical storms, what we're going through, losing jobs, having a terrible diagnosis, having a family member be caught up in addictions, whatever the storm is in your life. We often call out to Jesus. We call out to God and we say, where are you in this? And that's what God is looking for. He's looking for us to authentically engage with him in the middle of that storm, because God is revealed in the storm. So let's look at what's happening with Jesus and his 12 disciples today in Mark chapter 4. Read along with me. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. They were at a lake. So leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. And there were other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drowned?" So he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the waves died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you guys so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who the heck is this?" Or "Who is this?" And even the wind and the waves obey him. This guy can control the weather. Who is this? So the disciples are in the middle of this storm, and it's like me on that airplane. They're getting tossed about. Water is coming over the sides of the boat, into the boat. It's chaos. It's loud. And Jesus isn't waking up or doing anything. And I feel like oftentimes when we're in the middle of a storm, metaphorically, physically, we cry out to God for help. But the storm continues. It keeps getting worse. Things aren't changing. Nothing's happening. So we cry out again and again. Maybe we pray a little harder, or we get more people to pray. Things are getting really bad. But we can't see God doing anything to stop it. And it is natural to wonder, do you care? And that's the accusations that the disciples give to Jesus in this story. They say, do you care that we're about to drown? And I feel like many times when we are in a storm, we feel the same way. We feel like we have to wake God up to get a response out of him, to get him to do something different. But sometimes God deliberately chooses not to respond. An example of this is when Mary and Martha, Jesus' dear friends, sent word to him that their brother, Lazarus, was about to die, sick unto death. And they said, come and heal him before he dies. John 11, Jesus deliberately waited until he died before he did what they asked. Sometimes God chooses not to respond. Storms in life are confusing and hard, and when God seems to be unresponsive, he's not acting, he's not doing anything, what's going on, it feels really painful. And I think that Jesus understood this emotional pain. He sees that emotional pain. He's felt that emotional pain. When Martha, back to Martha, his good friend, when she was hosting a huge dinner party for he and his disciples, she was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she came to him and said, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work? And Jesus doesn't condemn that question here or in the boat with the disciples. In fact, he notices what Martha's going through. He says, Martha, I can see you're worried and upset. He names that emotions. He doesn't condemn it. Jesus doesn't condemn the question, don't you care? Because he felt it. When he hung on the cross, some of his final words were, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you? Why aren't you responding? Where did you go? Are you sleeping? Don't you care? So when we ask the question, God, don't you care? Jesus, don't you care? It shows that we believe that God is actually acting contrary to the way he should be acting. Because we believe God cares and we don't see any evidence. Lord, where is it? We believe that God is there, that God is listening, that God could do something in this situation, but he's deliberately choosing not to. And we think, don't you care? That's the seed of belief that we think, you know what? I actually think you do care. So what's going on? Jesus understands what it feels like to not have God respond to him. He knows what it feels like to think that God has abandoned us. And the heart of Jesus' story is not that we won't face storms or crosses or death, but that there is life after death. There is newness and restoration after the storm. It may feel like God's abandoned us. He's not working. But God's inaction on the cross, leaving Jesus there to die, his inaction on the cross became the method for the greatest action in all of time and space. The resurrection of the dead body of Jesus. And that's the good news. That's the heart of Jesus' teaching. That is the invitation to this table. When you say, I believe that it's not that God necessarily saves me out of the storm, but that he brings new life after. That's coming to the table and engaging with the person of Jesus. Storms and the struggle of God's inaction forces us to see God in a new way. Now, in 1986, an archaeologist dug up a picture of the boat. So we've got the disciples who are struggling against the storm in the boat, And I wanted to give you an idea of what that boat might have looked like. So they found this boat at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus and his disciples were in the story, buried in the mud, and they dated it to the year 50 AD. So this is indicative of the size and kind of boat these men would have been on. Can you imagine 13 people in that boat? It looks pretty small. So we've got Jesus sleeping in this boat, in the stern, and it's not like a big boat where he's down in his own bedroom taking a nap. He's there with them. And the disciples know that he could do something about what's happening. They're about to drown. Maybe they were bailing water. They're shouting. The waves are loud, or the wind is loud. And he's not waking up. So they know he could do something, so he must not care. So that's what they accuse him of. But what if Jesus wasn't choosing to be inactive in this case? What if he was simply exhausted and he was in a dead sleep? Now, Psalms 121 says that the God of Israel, he who watches over Israel, that's God, neither slumbers nor sleep. God's never asleep on the job. That is, until God became a human. And the Bible always presents Jesus as the Son of God who had human needs. He was a man. He was hungry. He was tempted. He didn't give in to the temptation, but he sure felt it. He was tempted. And he was tired. And if you remember the day that Jesus had, just to set the story in context, he had spent the entire day at the lake. You know how tiring that is. And on top of it, he was standing in the boat offshore yelling to thousands of people his lessons. Now, I just do this for 2 hours on Sunday morning, and I go home and nap for 5 hours. I'm exhausted. I can't imagine how tired he must have felt. So when he gets in this boat at evening time, he is exhausted. And through all this chaos, Jesus sleeps through the wind, through the waves, through the water, through getting wet. It's not until his friends start yelling at him and shaking him, "Jesus, wake up! Don't you care?" Now, when I'm awoken up from a dead sleep, I don't know if you're like me, but it takes a minute for my brain to catch up with my body, or my body to catch up with my brain, whichever it is. I remember when I was a teenager, I fell asleep with my arm over my head like this, and it was such a weird experience. I remember it. And my parents were out of town, and so I'm sound asleep, and I hear this ring, one of those old rotary phones. And so I went, and I was like, oh, I have to answer that. My parents are gone. And I went to grab it, but my arm wouldn't go that direction, and I couldn't figure out where I was and who I was and what my name was. But finally, I was like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing. And then I used the other hand to pick up the phone and answer it. It took a minute. So Jesus gets jerked out of sleep in this chaotic situation to the waves splashing, the boat tumbling and jumping, and friends shouting at him. And he's awoken, and before he could put his usual strength, restraint on his immense power that he has, he spoke, "Quiet, calm down." And I wonder if this miracle is just a startle response to being woken up from a dead sleep. Did he really mean to make everything go dead calm? Because 1 second there's chaos, the next dripping, quiet. And I imagine a bit of a sleepy, sheepish grin when Jesus says, "Guys, why are you acting like scaredy cats? Do you still not trust me?" Did he mean to make everything go perfectly still, or did power slip out of him and that perfectly normal human sleep confusion? Either way, doesn't matter, but either way, now the disciples are really terrified. Or in the King's English, the King James Version, if you like that, they are sore afraid. Or in the Greek, it says, fearing they feared greatly. Their fear goes from cowardice, being little scaredy cats, to full-fledged terror when they realized they were in the presence of the greatest power in the universe. The only person who can control the weather is God. And they realize Jesus is God. In calming the wind and the waves, the presence of God is revealed to his followers. They realize he's more than a prophet. They realize he's more than a miracle worker. He's more than just a good teacher. They literally ask, what kind of human is this? So why follow Jesus? Why believe in Jesus? Why accept the invitation to this table of faith? Because Jesus is God. And the lesson in this is that this storm revealed that God was in the boat in the middle of the storm with those disciples all along. Storms in our life reveal God to us. I would like to invite Captain Jake to the stage, and he's going to share with us about asking God all the questions, all the do you cares, all the complaints, as God is revealed in a new way to him through the storm. Come on up, Jake.
Thank you. So I know I was introduced as Captain Jake Fouts with Snoqualmie Fire, but I don't want that to be the identity that you see me as today. While I may have met many of you throughout my time here in Snoqualmie, either on emergency calls or classes I've taught, or just interactions across the street at Safeway when I pick up my $9.99 sushi at lunch, the reality is I want my identity to be one that is somebody who's following Christ, and I want you to remember me for that. I don't want to be remembered as a fireman who just came up here and said some words and then left you guys to the rest of the service. So thank you for having me here today. When I first got invited to do this, I was having a meeting with Pastor Charlie. I'm taking an executive leadership class at the National Fire Academy, and part of that is you have to engage with the community on a different level, and you have to find people to be intentful with, to have conversation about how your organizations can work together, and in this instance, the church as well as the fire department. But our conversation quickly turned into some of our own stories, and we were able to find some time to draw some parallels. And what struck me about it was that we had a lot of parallels. While different, we were both being moved to do more within our communities. Pastor Charlie here with the church and Snoqualmie, myself with the fire department, and then the people that I'm surrounded with day in and day out. So that gave me the opportunity, the invite to come in and speak. But my connection goes back just a little bit further, and I'm not going to name names here, but there may have been about 10 years ago a youth pastor who had a fabulous idea of, on Wednesday night, lighting a couch on fire in the middle of the parking lot and using it as a vision for a message. He called me at the fire department and asked me if we would come do a standby and let him do that. And you can imagine my face when I'm sitting at my desk and just absolute no, you can't do this. But what I did do is I offered to come up and tell a little bit of my story, use our fire extinguisher prop that we had, and light a fire and connect with the youth that way. And I didn't think it was going to be that. I thought I was just simply going to be the person lighting the fire and putting the fire out while the message was delivered. But it was quickly handed to me and let me talk with the youth. So some of you may have heard some of my story already. And if you have, I'm glad you're back in here today. But that brings me to why I'm here. To give you the short story, my childhood, my upbringing was pretty rough. My mom and dad divorced very early when I was young. My mom battled addiction. My half-brother and her raised me until I was about 8, and it was this give and take back and forth. She's at work, I'm at school. He's here taking care of me. It was it was rough. Well, 8, my stepdad and stepbrother come into the picture, move into the house, and you would think that bringing people into the home to help stabilize things and work towards that traditional family would get better. It didn't. There was chaos, there was verbal abuse, there was mental abuse, there was more addiction, drugs, alcohol, isolation. Friends were not allowed to come to the house because there were drugs in the house. It was a very rough period of my life. So it was all I could do that when I turned 18 to run as fast as I could out of the house and find some sort of stability and some sort of future for myself. So I went in the Army and did a short stint there at Fort Knox in Kentucky until I broke my foot. And when I broke my foot, they quickly said, nope, you're going to ride a desk for the rest of your life. You can go home. So I said, no, I don't want to ride a desk. I want out. And I came home, joined the fire service, and for me, the fire service was a piece of comfort. It was something that I thought was going to be my future. My grandfather was a firefighter for 27 years in Seattle, and I had grown up around it and had done fire explorers and tried to connect, but I never really knew what the future held, but I knew I wanted the fire service. So in '98, when I came home from the Army, I joined Maple Valley Fire as a firefighter. And for those of you that work in public service or have ever had a family member or somebody work in public service, you know the people that do this on a volunteer basis typically want to do this as a career. And it takes them about 2 to 3 years to get hired. So that was where my timeline was. I joined in '98, and I figured 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to have a job. But that wasn't happening. I would take tests and quickly get rejected. I would brush it off and just move to the next one and just keep trying to be better each and every time. I loved the fire service. I enjoyed the teamwork, the adrenaline, but I love the identity more. Moving past the getting hired phase, in 2002, while I was still volunteering with Maple Valley, I frequented McCabe's Country Bar in Tacoma, and that's where I met my wife. And the thing that I remember about my wife from that night was her eyes, her smile, but then when we sat down at the table, that she held my hand. And there's something to be said about that, because I hadn't had that before. I've had girlfriends, but not somebody who so immediately connected with you that they're just holding your hand. It's that peace, that patience, that calm. And we didn't know it. We weren't living a spiritual life. We weren't going out of our way to make a connection with God, but we were connected. So in 2003, late 2002, I proposed. 2003, we got married. But when we did this, I realized that I hadn't been hired in the fire service at this point. Time to give up. That's 5 years deep. There's just nothing there for me. I'm going to have a family. I need to move on and try something different. So that's what I did. I went to work for various different companies. I drove tow truck and repo and Aramark laundry services. I worked all over the place. But as married couples do, we found ourselves expecting a child in the spring of 2004. And that's when my wife and I decided that maybe there's something different that we need to be doing, not focusing on the world, not focusing on what other people view us for. And we found Solid Rock Community Church in Covington. We started attending, and mind you, somebody who came up from a background like mine, where the family was Catholic on one side, agnostic on the other, they mourned their faith. It wasn't anything that I ever wanted to be a part of. I didn't think that there was anything there for me. I figured it was stiff, stuffy, formal. But when I walked into Solid Rock that first time, the thing I remember is that it wasn't stiff, it wasn't formal. It was welcoming. There was handshakes, there were smiles, there were people who asked me my name right away, and they wanted to build a connection with me. That turned something on in my brain. I wouldn't say it quite hit my heart yet, but it turned something on in my brain. I realized, wait a minute, maybe there is something here. Well, fast forward 2005, January 2005, my daughter Isabella is born. She turns 21 here in January. February, she gets dedicated that same year. And then something bigger happened. In March of 2005, my wife and I together in the crisp, cold waters of Lake Meridian were baptized on Easter Sunday, which I can't say enough about what that feeling was like and what that meant. And when you think about those cold waters and how painful that can be, the reality is when you came up out of it, it was warm. It was absolutely warm. There was no shivering or shaking. People surrounded you with hugs, and you realized that you were part of something bigger and better. And it was this point where my wife, through her encouraging, pushed me to go back into the fire service and find that path forward and work hard and use our faith and our strength together to achieve that dream. Well, So that's what I did. I joined another fire department as a volunteer, hoping to get hired. And I started doing everything in my power to check boxes and move forward and test and train and volunteer, all while leaving my wife at home to take care of my daughter. So we spent more time apart than we ever actually spent together. We joined a small group. We started doing studies. My wife was fully invested, but me, not so much. I was checking boxes. I was going to church. I was praying very scripted. I was only reading what I needed to read for the study and nothing more. I didn't dig deeper. I didn't intentionally draw a connection. I didn't put myself into a position to where I was ready for what God was going to tell me and what he was trying to teach me. So this is where things got a little tougher. And this put us into this position of just waiting for God's provision. ESV, Proverbs 16:9 says, "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." And in this whole season, I was just letting my heart lead me, but never actually listening for that response from God, that God really wanted me to take these next steps to move forward. So I continued testing, and of course, naturally, doors kept closing. But at this time, I was testing high, 1, 2 on the list, and people would continuously say, "Nope, you're not good enough. Nope, I don't want you. Nope, we can't have you here," until I finally get somebody to say, "There's something in your background, but we can't talk about it, so move on." Well, we get through 2007, and my wife and I take another step of faith. And again, this is me checking boxes, but her being intentional, is that we started tithing. And those of you that have young families or expecting your first child or working low-paying jobs, you know that tithing is scary. It's hard. You're not sure how to keep the lights on. You're not sure how to keep food on the table. But your hope is that by doing something faithfully, God's going to continue to provide. And he did. Constantly. We always had food on the table. Our bills were paid. Our lights were on. And we had people next to us that were there to support us in the struggles and our need in that time. Well, we fast forward through 2007, move into 2008. I'm still cranking away. I'm volunteering. I'm working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, plus volunteering 2 and 3 nights a week. My wife's home. She's got 2 babies now. My son Archer was born in 2007. She never sees me. I'm working constantly. Something had to change. Well, 2008, I started testing really high again. Number 1 on the list over and over and over. And you can bet that every time I got that phone call or got a letter in the mail of rejection, you can imagine what that did for me. I just constantly had this anger built into me. And at one point, I just screamed out, why? Why can I not do this? Why am I not succeeding? Where am I failing? And I constantly made it about me. And going back and looking, this is that checkbox Christian that I was, that 30,000-foot Instagram Sunday Christian. You know, I didn't do it because I wanted connection. I did it because I thought it might get me something. The reality was I needed to make changes. So 2009, our church started doing the Daniel fast. And for those of you that don't know what the Daniel fast is, it's 21 days of a plant-based diet. It's prayer, it's fasting, it's reading, it's being connected intentionally, looking for that faith that Daniel had, that we all still strive for. And going into it, I was still very much young in my own faith, my own walk, and I was mechanical about it. I read the little card that they gave me when we started it, and I read the specific prayers, and I read the specific verses, and then I threw it to the side and I went about my day. I didn't eat anything. I was miserable. You can ask my wife. I was pretty insufferable to be around. But the reality was the first couple of days I was super mechanical with what I was doing. Well, we got to day 5, and my work schedule was very complex. I was working those 60-hour weeks. I didn't have time to just stop and read a card anymore. It was becoming cumbersome. So I just started talking while I drove, or talking while I was walking between my customers, and just having that conversation. And when I did that, I couldn't believe what the intentionality started doing. I still wasn't fully sure what was happening, but all I could feel during this time was these words of peace, calm, patience. And I kept hearing that over and over for the rest of the time we were on this fast. But day 19 hits, and 21 days, you're expected to be much more connected. And I feel like I was, but boy, was I pretty insufferable when it came to the food and being energetic and being happy to be around. Over and over during these 19 days, I had gotten more rejections. Day 19 hit, and I can remember, it was toward the end of my day, I got another rejection. But this one hit hard because I thought for sure I had made it all the way through the process. I was in the final backgrounds, thought I was going to have the job, and they called me, and thanks, but no thanks. I was crushed because I thought for sure that was where my future was going to be. I went home and was pretty angry, was ready to walk away from the fast, didn't want to be part of it. Wanted to eat, wanted to drink, wanted to do all the things that come along with just breaking and brushing it away. But I didn't. I stuck with it. The next morning, though, I went back to being mechanical. I whipped out that card on day 20, and I just read what it said. And I just read the verse, and then I went about my day just angry, insufferable, broken. Well, the end of the day comes, and I'm at my last two stops. And when I got to my second to the last stop, this is a place that I normally had stopped and spent some time with my customer. He was somebody I had built up a friendship with, and we get to talk about a lot of things, talk about life and family and just things in general. Well, when I pulled in, I took a look and his truck wasn't there. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I kind of knew his pattern. I knew when he'd come and go. He would always tell me if he was going on vacation. And when I pulled up to this gravel plant and saw that his truck wasn't there, I went in and I knew who the operator would be. And when I saw Chris behind the counter, her face was different. You could tell her eyes were red. She'd been crying a little bit. And I asked her what was going on. And that's when I found out that my friend was found dead in his home in North Bend that morning, and he had taken his own life. I did my best to hold it together while I was there, but I broke down. I cried. I was hurt. I didn't understand why somebody could do something like that. And I began immediately building this self-doubt in my brain. Why, God? Why would somebody ever do this? I finished my stop, and as I got back into my truck and gained my composure, I got another phone call from another fire department. And you guys can guess, this was another rejection. And I've already built up all this hurt on top of it. What's one more? Well, after I find out my friend had committed suicide that morning, I lost it. I absolutely lost it. I pulled over in front of my customers, my last stop of the day, and I started screaming and yelling, throwing things. I ruined linen. I ruined laundry. I broke things in my truck. I flipped out. I didn't know what to do. I screamed, I yelled, I accused, I cursed. It was ugly. If you've ever seen a grown man throw a temper tantrum, it's miserable. I just couldn't understand why. Why did he kill himself? Why can I not achieve things? I give everything to you, but why? Why can't I do this? And I did that for about 10, 15 minutes. I regained my composure because I had to wrap my day up. And as soon as I regained my composure, right as I'm stepping out of my truck, my phone rang one more time. But this time it was different. It was Snoqualmie. I heard Becky's voice on the other side of the phone, and Long story short, she said, Mr. Fouts, I want to offer you a position here in Snoqualmie, but we have things to figure out first. Okay, great, let's do it. I don't remember the rest of the conversation because all I was doing was crying and yes, 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 whatever you need, yes, I'll do it. Hung up the phone and I broke down again. You didn't think a man could cry so many times in one day, I did. And it was another ugly cry, but the only thing that came out of my mouth that time was thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, fast forward and to kind of give you the big pieces of this story, I met with the background investigator here in Snoqualmie who's doing my background check, Sergeant Chris Todd. He's gone off to be with the Lord now. We had a good chance to talk just for a few minutes, and he's like, you know what? You have these glowing references. You have all these things that you've done to be better. You're an excellent candidate. Why aren't people hiring you? I said, I don't know. I said, here's all the things I've done. And then he goes into the question. He asked me, he says, so, what happened in Kelso in 2000? What about the gun? How about the fighting with the cops? You can imagine my look. Stunned. He says, what are all these things in your background? I said, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. But right as I said that, it clicked. I told him, run this name, run this date of birth. So he did. And you could see the expression on his face change. He looked at me and looked at the screen. And he went back to me and went, who is this? I said, well, that's my stepbrother. And he said, well, come around, look at the screen. And he did, line for line. Everything that he had done was on my criminal record. Except for the speeding ticket in Othello in 2001. And those of you that drive to Pullman, you know the exact spot that you get pulled over. But he said, this is your problem. This is what happened. I was shocked. He was shocked. He wrote the letter. He cleared things up. He recommended me for employment. He's like, you need to get a lawyer. I said, okay, I'll figure this out. And I left and sat in my car and bawled my eyes out again. But the reality is, I finally had answers. But here's the problem. The answers weren't that somebody used my name in the commission of felonies. It's that I was accusing God over and over and over of forgetting me, for not doing something for me, not connecting with me. But in the end, I was the one that wasn't being intentional. I had to take time and connect and really figure out what his purpose was for me. It's hard to think that you're forgotten. It's hard to think that you're not wanted. It's hard to think that somebody's not listening, especially God. You want that connection. But looking back now, I see what I couldn't then. Every single rejection was God preparing me and building me back up for his purpose. He wasn't holding me back, he was holding me steady. He was shaping my heart before giving me responsibilities that I was praying for. So, friends, waiting's hard. Silence is hard. But you got to keep pushing through that. Remember, he uses rejection to refine your character. He uses your pain to build purpose. When I thought he was saying no, he was just telling me not yet. So today, my hope is that this story reminds somebody, anybody in this room, that no matter what storm you're in, no matter what the rejection or the silence that you're going through, or the heartache, God's still moving. He doesn't waste your pain, he redeems it. He doesn't forget his promises for you. He fulfills them in his time. You know, sometimes his greatest miracles happen not in the fire, but in the waiting. So I just ask you to be intentional, stay connected, and ultimately trust his timing. And if you want to hear the rest of my story, come down to the fire station, buy me a cup of coffee. There is so much more. So thank you. Appreciate you.
Good job. As we close, would you stand with me? I know that some of you are here this morning because you're in the middle of a storm and you really want that connection with God. You want to experience God in a new way. Let me encourage you to think of Jake's story and say, how can I engage with God with my whole self? Even if it means asking God, don't you care? Where are you? Why aren't you listening to me? Would the prayer team come forward? We have safe people here who would love to pray with you, wrestle with you. And let me close in prayer. Dear Lord, the God of the universe who came as a man and sat on a boat, lived through a storm and calmed it. Lord, we look to you in the middle of our struggles and our pain. Lord, you say you love us and you care for us and you want us to know you. And so, Lord, I pray as we go through our storms that we would do just that and that you would be revealed to us in a new and exciting way, some way we didn't even expect. We love you so much, God. Thank you for this day and thank you for all you've done for us. In your name, amen.